So I'm going to talk about this thing called BEAM and this thing called Data Vault, and why actually it looks like it's a really good happy marriage when I've been using it for the last couple of years. As you may have heard from my accent, I come from a little place down the bottom of the world called New Zealand. 15 years ago I used to work for some big American companies selling software and pre-sales, so my job then was convincing customers that what we had to sell actually solved some of their business problems, which is quite a cool challenge. And then I started a small consulting company in Wellington, really focused around roadmap strategies, evaluations, and some delivery stuff. For the last 4 years, what I've been doing is taking Agile techniques and helping our customers apply them to data analytics and BI, which has kind of been a really cool experience. When I talk about BEAM and Data Vault, I first read Lawrence Korr's book around BEAM in 2012. What we ended up doing is writing our own one-day course, which we've run with Lawrence's permission. And Lawrence kind of flew over in 2015 and ran his 3-day course in Wellington for our customers, and has done that consistently every year. So he comes across and we get to see what's new. In terms of Vault, I did my first implementation in 2013. If I go back and look at that Vault, would I be proud of it? Well, it was a good start, right? We learned lots. Then basically decided I needed to work with somebody who'd done some serious vaulting. So hired a guy called Brian Bradley, who worked for a company called Xero, which is one of the first vaults in New Zealand. And then got Hans to come over in 2015 and start running the Genesee curriculum for us. Same thing, he comes over every year and runs it for our customers. And I've just finished coming off the first implementation of a Data Vault in a big data platform, or a MapR platform this year, which again, kind of like my first Vault experience, was a really interesting experience. Not sure I'd like to do it again. And from travel, yeah, so to get here I went through 4 airports, 12,000 kilometres. I spent 15.5 hours in the air, only 24 hours actually to get here, so the changeover was good. And I left on a Friday, and 24 hours later I turned up on a Friday. So yeah, it's a bit like time travel when I was a kid. Yeah. So just got 26 minutes so that I can get the speed right. First question, who's actually used BEAM, the stuff that Lawrence Korr teaches? Okay, cool. And the next question, who's used Data Vault and implemented it? Yeah, so a lot more modelers in the room. Okay. So let's have a quick kind of scene setting of what the two things are before we put them together. So for me, BEAM is a way of capturing data requirements from business users without them knowing you're actually asking them data requirements. Yeah? It gives us a language where we can ask them questions that they actually understand the question, and they can give us an answer that we actually understand. The second part of it is, it's really important, is it's iterative. Yeah, we don't have to boil the ocean. We don't have to go out and spend 6 months getting requirements. We can start off with a very small piece and extend those requirements later as we need to. For me, Vault is a way of actually bringing that iterative or agile development for our data. Yeah, we can structure the data in a way that we can start off small and we can incrementally build that model out without having to refactor everything every time. So from an Agile point of view, those two techniques or two patterns go really nicely together in terms of iterative development or iterative delivery. When you go on the BEAM course, the way Lawrence describes it is he talks about the 7 W's. He takes a bit of how many and how, there's a W in there, so there's a bit of creative license. And what we do is we go and talk to the customer, and the first thing we say to them is, who does what? Yeah? And we will normally hear, once we get the right answer, something like customer orders product. Now, why that's really important from an Agile point of view is, no matter what the organisation does in terms of their systems and their source systems, and what they do in terms of their admin process, what they do as a core business event, who does what, will typically not change. So if I'm working with a company and I hear customer orders product, and then later on I hear customer lodges claim, I'm going to say that something's changed in the business model, right? I'm going from being a sales company to a company that's got some form of insurance. And actually, therefore, the change that I'm going to have to do is going to be massive. But if I hear that, customer orders product and we're going from a bespoke system to Salesforce, I know I have a whole lot of technical change, but the core business events, the things that we do and the data that we expect to see, should stay the same. So it enables me to kind of factor in the size of the change. The other thing we'll get is we'll typically get a sentence back for them once we run the workshops that goes, customer orders an ice cream at a store for an employee using a promotion at 1 p.m. on Friday for $4.50. Each one of those is a W, right? I know that customers are who, orders is a what, ice cream's a what, stores are locations, so probably a where, sometimes it's a what. An employee's a who, a promotion code is typically a why. Why did they buy the ice cream? Because it was on sale. The 1 p.m. and the Fridays are whens, and the $4.50 is the how many. Yeah? So I can now start tagging or categorizing that data for my model, which is really, really important. When we talk about data vault and key instance hubs, or what we call driving hubs, we also know that the orders is the thing that tells me how did I know that it happened. I think the way that Hans describes it is Peter the Fly. If I'm standing there and looking at it and somebody actually bought something, and the data, how do I know that that event actually happened if I wasn't watching it? So for me, the how in here would be order. You know, there'll be some unique ID to say that this order actually happened. When we run the workshops with the users, they never know about that key, right? They know that there was an order. They typically can't tell us there's an order ID. Normally it's hidden in the systems of record that we read from. But we can elicit that out as a data requirement. So in terms of BEAM, the way it's described is we talk about three things. We talk about an event, which is really a core business process, so who does what. We talk about detail, which is describing things, so customers, products. And we talk about detail of detail, although Lawrence is kind of changing that term to more being talking about attributes. And they describe things, yeah? So a customer has a name, it has an address, gender, and age. In terms of the workshops, there's some templates that we use, these BEAMS events and these detail of detail tables. And what's really important about the BEAM event when we do it is we ask for the business users for examples of data which we write on the wall. So when they say, oh, there's a customer, we go back and we say to them, what's an example of a customer? And what we're looking for is we'll typically get given a person's name, an organisation's name, and maybe a trust, and we say, okay, now from the data we can infer that actually these three types of customers. Is that important? I go, oh yeah, customer type, really, really important. We need that for a lot of reporting. So by getting them to give you examples, you can clarify early in your data requirements what they're looking for in the way the systems behave. And you can find what we call the fish hooks. When you ask for examples, they will always give you the gnarly example they know breaks your reporting every time, right? Because they just love to show you how hard it is. So that's a really important part of the process that we use. If I look at it in terms of Vault, you guys know this, we have hubs, we have sats, we have links, right? And similar type of words where we talk about a core business process or core business event, within BEAM, we talk about a hub representing a core business concept, a link doing a core business relationship, right? So as we'll see in a minute, there's quite a bit of terminology crossover. It's as if when people invented BEAM and when they invented Vault, they were kind of in the same room but didn't realise it, yeah? So if we're talking about these things, this BEAM, this Vault and some other things, if we're going to do Agile within data analytics and BI, where does it fit? And the way I talk about it is I talk about process patterns, template and automation, right? They're all really important if you're going to bring agility to the way you deliver. So there's a bunch of, I call it standing on the shoulders of giants. There's a bunch of things that have been available for a long time that if you put them together in the right way, you can actually get really good agility in terms of your delivery cycle. So we talk about scoping and value mapping. We talk about a thing called information products in terms of defining what we need to deliver when. BEAM and Vault are two core parts of those patterns. Using decision tables and Gherkin scripts for defining business rules or data rules. And then, we've come from this world of automation, which got a name called DevOps, and it's kind of been rebranded for DataOps now as kind of, in our part of the world, the cool word for automating data. So how do we automate our transformations, being config driven? How do we automate our tests? How do we automate our deployment into our production environments? And how do we automate our reconciliation of the data across the layers? The first thing I do when I work with a customer, the first thing they ask me is, which order do I do it in? Yeah, and the answer is always depends. Yeah, depends if you're rebuilding an old warehouse, if you're starting off with a whole new project, or if you're a new company starting up from scratch. So what we will typically do is take the steps and then blend them into, almost a life cycle that makes sense for them. So this is from one customer I've just finished. We went out and actually captured all the information products first because they needed to get a portfolio idea of how big it was to get funding. It's an agile organisation that funds everything once a year. That's an oxymoron, by the way. They needed to understand how big the elephant was so they could figure out how much they were going to buy it off and what it was going to cost. And the information products enabled us to gather size and prioritise for that. We then went in to actually get the data requirements. Then we went in and actually modelled it, created some of the business rules, automated it all the way through to deployment. So that can change depending on who you are as a customer and what you want to do. The other thing is when we look at Beam to Vault, why would we want to do this? And this is probably quite a controversial statement when you're standing in front of a room of modelers. One of the problems we have with Agile is data modelers are often seen as a little guru, right? They sit with their whiteboard in a room and and a little while later a model comes out, yeah? Nobody understands how they got there. You try and challenge the model, oh my word. Now ELM is kind of a really good approach for changing the way we model and making it more engaging. For me, the combining of Beam and Vault, which I'll show you in a minute, what it does is it removes the resource constraint, right? It removes this fact that we actually really only have one or two experts in the company or in the consulting company that can actually do the work. And we devolve it out to a bunch of people. Now, to be clear, what we do is we devolve out the initial go at it. Yeah, I talk about you can't automate it completely, you still need a brain. All we're doing is getting some starters that can then be peer-reviewed and argued about until we get a refined model. So we're going from this idea of only having one person that can do it, because if you're running an agile team, you need T-skills, somebody else needs to be able to do some of it some of the time. We move away from this idea that it's black box and magic to being able to have some form of lineage of how the hell did we get to that model. We move from experts to enthusiasts. Just make that one up, that's quite cool. We move away from what we call late documentation, right? The team have actually worked on the model together, they all understand it, versus waiting for the modeler to actually document how they got there and why it was important. So that's why we use these techniques. So let's have a look about how these two kind of work really nicely together. If we look at the way we used to do modeling or building warehouses, we used to be data-driven, right? We used to look at the source system, we used to profile it, we used to build something based on what the data looked like. We moved for a few years to what I call report-driven. We kind of figured out we needed a report and we modeled all the data just for that report, and then moved on to model-driven, which is probably the controversial one, where we build a data model and then we populated it. What we want to do is move to that business process driven, right? If customer orders product is what we do, if everything's bound to that process, then we're going to be safer because that process will not change. Everything else will, but not that process. The other thing we want to do is we want to make it interactive and fun. Yeah, writing a 100-page document is probably one of the least exciting things I can think of doing. Yeah? Standing in front of a bunch of business people and helping model their business in terms of data, that's pretty cool. And so there's this term called model storming, where we take data modeling and we take brainstorming, we put it together to actually create the artifacts that we need to build. So if we look at Beam on the left and we look at Vault on the right, who does what? It maps to a link. Yeah? A detail, core business entity, maps to a hub, and detail to detail maps to a satellite, right? It's effectively a one-to-one mapping, like I said, as if the two things were invented at the same time. So when we run a Beam workshop, what we do is we will populate the answers into an Excel spreadsheet, but in terms of model storming, in our experience, the worst thing you can do is bring an Excel spreadsheet up onto a screen and try and populate it with the business users. It's weird, it's a human thing. They just shut down. You know, they don't engage, right? They're looking at a screen and it's really, really a bad process. So what we do is we kind of model on a whiteboard or a white wall or brown paper. And what we're doing is we're writing stickies, which are the headings. They're the who does the who's and the what. So we'll hear a sticky for customer, a sticky for product, a sticky for order. And then in the columns, we're writing up examples of the data as they give it to us. Now, if you're running a Beam workshop, there's some techniques that we use that are really, really successful. if you're facilitating an audience, as the facilitator, it's a really hard job, right? You've got a bunch of people in the room and you're trying to elicit some information from them. So anything that distracts you from keeping that flow going actually kind of degrades the workshop. So what we always do is have somebody that writes the sticky notes as a second person. Yeah? So they actually, as somebody says, oh, we've got customer and they order a product, somebody will write customer, order and product and put it up on the board for us. The other thing is, and again I'll reiterate it, getting the example data from those subject matter experts is actually how we confirm we've got the right information. And it also means we can give that information back to them. So one of the techniques we use once we've built the vault is we then actually create a query that sucks all the data out of the vault into this template and give it back to them. And we say, hey, you remember that workshop that we ran? Yeah, here's what you told us. Actually, here's the data. Yeah? And have a look, customer name. You told us that your customers are always people. But funny enough, let's look at some data where you've got a whole lot of organizations in there. What do you want to do about that, right? Is it a different thing or is it just a type of a thing, right? And so we can give it back to them and get feedback, which is really, really important. What we then do, like I said, is we put it into the spreadsheet. So as you can see there at the top, we've got the column headings and we've got the examples of data. These spreadsheets are open source templates that Lawrence created. Actually, one of the interesting things about them is in the ones that Lawrence produced, he has macros that run and actually build your star schema for you. I've never quite got round to actually updating it with one that builds a data vault. Be quite cool. So what we have is we have the columns of the who does what's. We put in the sample data. And then what we do is we get the people, the beam facilitators, to actually build the data vault model for us. So what we do is we say, hey, if you've got a W and it's a strong W, it's a hub. So color it blue. Yeah, so I can see there that I have this thing called customer, which is a who. On the left-hand side, they've gone through and said, hey, I need a customer hub, and I'm going to put a blue dot in there to say that's a hub. And I've got this thing called a product. I'm going to go away and actually put a blue in there, so say I'm going to create a product hub. And I've got another blue for my order, because I want to create an order hub. So now visually, they're actually modeling from the beam template to the vault model. They go through and they go, hey, there's some attributes and things that aren't strong things, but they describe things, they're satellites, we'll colour them yellow. And that's pretty much where a lot of the argument is, right? Is it a strong thing or is it a descriptor of a thing? Is it blue or is it yellow? That's where a lot of us spend a lot of our time arguing. Once we do that, we then start building the links, the relationships. And often we'll build the links and the relationships based on how the users may want to get the data back out. Yeah? So you'll see here that we've got two links that are related to that customer orders product. We have a three-way link in the first one, which is customer, product, and order. And then from a reporting point of view, based on information products, we know that they often want to report on, for that product, which store and which employee actually took that order. Yeah? So we create, in this case, we're creating a five-way link, right? Which is just another version of the initial link. And they're coloured in red, but I've just remembered I need to update it to green, which I'll do soon. Yeah, well, the good thing about green is if you're colourblind, red doesn't work. So yeah, you end up with linkless vaults, which aren't so good. And then the other thing we've been doing in terms of iterating through, as we now talk about this thing called a driving hub or a keyed instance, we start colour coding the links with a darker colour to say, actually, that hub's the hub that drives it. So again, if I go back to the way the 7Ws work, a lot of the workshops are really saying to them, how do I know this happened? Yeah, because that's the driver of everything we do. So in this case, if they go customer orders product, how did I know a customer ordered that product? Normally you'll see an order ID, therefore I know that's my driving hub or my keyed instance. I'm now saying for that relationship, for that link, that order ID hub is the one I need to care about. And the way we do the links now, we tend to use quite long, depending on the database or the big data, no database, we'd start putting kind of more business descriptions of our links, right? So our links will be something like order, customer, product. And the other thing we do is we put the driving hub name at the beginning of the link, yeah? So when we see order, customer, product, I know that that's driven from the order hub, yeah? So that's kind of how we're doing it at the moment to see how that works. So once I've done that, effectively I can go from a beam template to a model, yeah? And I can do one of two things. I can go through a peer review whiteboard exploration session, which kind of is an argument of architects. Or we can actually quickly create the model, load some data and see what happens, which is my preference, right? Depending on how much automation we have and where we are in the development cycle. So one of the challenges with Agile that we always have is what we call iteration 0, right? You know, if you're going to do something in 2, 3 or 4 weeks, and for me, for Agile BI, we typically in a sprint or a scrum environment will do 3 weeks. Found 2 weeks a bit short, 4 weeks a bit long. Have done 1 week, it was incredibly funny. We might do it again. What we want to be able to do is do things really quickly. But if we're implementing a new platform, you know, we've got to stand up servers, you know, we've got to actually create frameworks and all that stuff. So it's always one of the challenges. But if we're in a kind of a cycle where all that's set up and we can actually model very quickly, our preference is to create the model, load the data, see what happens, yeah? And then go back and argue whether the model was correct versus arguing over whiteboard, yeah? Because we can actually prove it. So one of the interesting things we've been testing with lately, and after going through the ELM stuff on Monday, we'll kind of iterate on what we've been doing, is the last one we did, we were running the workshops for Beam and we were modelling in the back of the room at the same time. So I was facilitating, I had a person that was helping me doing the stickies and helping with that. And at the back of the room, we had the kind of Vault modelers actually building the data vault model on the whiteboard at the same time. Yeah, we really would have liked to build the software, and I think Peter's talked about that, actually have the software and demo the report right at the end of the workshop. Would have been way cool, but we're nowhere near there yet. Now what's interesting is we learned a couple of things about this. If you're in a room like this and you've got a bunch of business subject matter experts and you're trying to elicit requirements from them, having a couple of vocal modelers right behind them arguing about the data model is a bad thing. Yeah, yeah. So what we did in our second iteration of this is they did what's called silent modeling. Yeah, they modeled, but they weren't allowed to talk to each other. What they actually said is they modeled faster, because when they were talking to each other, they were arguing about what a thing was. When they were silent modeling, it got up there. You couldn't argue about it, so they fought over a couple of stickies. But they modeled it much quicker, yeah? I'm still going to argue about it later, but it's okay. The second thing is when they were talking to each other and arguing, they weren't listening to the rest of the room. So they found they got behind, and they had to then tap one of the other people on the shoulder going, oh, what'd they just say? When they were doing it silently, they could model quickly and then listen. The second thing we learned was they needed to be able to ask some questions and get some feedback, because that made them faster. So in a Beam session, you normally would not do a Beam session for more than 4 hours, right? 4 hours of facilitating somebody is hard. 4 hours for somebody to be facilitated is more than 4 hours is difficult. So we normally aim for a 4-hour workshop. We try and get out in 3, but sometimes there's a bit of spillover. What they found is we tend to do a 45-minute break each time to give a bit of a thing. So at that stage, they got the right to ask some clarifying questions, yeah, which allowed them to model quickly. So really interesting experiment that we've been doing, and something that we'll probably do more and more as we go. Yeah, so that's effectively the process, right? Whiteboard the Beam who does what's, put it into the template. Try and model on the way if you can. If not, update the template. The template then effectively becomes a data dictionary, right? We now have all the attributes, descriptions of the data, and effectively we've started to document, but it's documents that we use to go to the next step rather than documents we put on the shelf. So we're looking at ways of how do we automate that, right? How do we take that Beam template, move it into some form of config, and actually make it our living data dictionary as we go through, automate that process. It goes straight into the model. Once we've got the Vault model, then we'll go through and create some semantic layers and create the content and improve whether the model survived, which often it doesn't. But then we just go back and reiterate it, right? We may go back to the customer and say, to the business to me and say, you've told us some things and the data doesn't look that way. Or we may give it back to them and they say, that's not quite what we asked for, which is what you hear lots, right? And we go, cool, well, this is what the Beam templates. Let's go through and figure out what we didn't hear correctly, and let's update that, and then let's quickly change it, and let's give it back to you and revalidate it. So for me, Beam to Vault, it's kind of a one-to-one, yeah? It just works. It's a thing of beauty, as we call it in New Zealand. Any questions? Yep.
how many sessions have you made of like this?
So I've been doing Beam and Vault mapping probably 2 years now. The workshop ones where we've been modelling in the workshop, we've effectively done it for a few times with Brian, and I used to do it together. This is the first time we've actually done it with the customer team, where the customer's team are doing the Vault modelling themselves rather than us. So you probably experimented that with a couple of times. Yeah. Yeah.
One thing for me, because I love Beam, I love the way it's working. We can say we have customers, and we found out the detailed information you have individual customers and organization. For Beam it doesn't matter, because it's on the board and it's okay for the board over there. For the data vault model, it does matter.
It could matter.
It could matter.
It could matter.
How do you handle that? Because if you're doing the same time, the model is on the back, it's a rollout.
Yep. So remember, the modeler at the back are giving us data for 10. We go back and validate what that means. So one of the things is, I think it was Hans talked about the definition of perfect, right? The number of times we will argue about whether we should have a customer hub or an individual and an organisation hub, right? And it's kind of like screw the business key. I'm like, just do both, right? Like, seriously, they're just hubs, they've just got keys, right? So do a customer one and then put a customer type in the set and create an individual hub and create an organisation hub, right? Again, it's, the thing about Vault is a pattern, right? The pattern is create hub, create sat, create link. Load hub, load sat, load link. There's not a lot of code involved, it's just config. So do both, right? And then see what happens, see which ones get used the most. Yeah, otherwise we'll spend more time arguing about which is right than actually creating it and seeing which one gets used. Yeah.
That takes all the fun out of it, right?
The fun out of the arguing? No, we still argue, yeah. Yeah, a room full of architects is just an argument, right? So, yeah, there's no around
We still often say, you put 3 architects in the room, you come up with 6 solutions.
Yeah. There's some interesting challenges that come up when you do the one-to-one mapping though. So if we talk about our friend order and order line, right, in Vault we'll tend to break them out, right? In Beam what we get is a couple of extra columns, which are the orders lines, and what will happen is the grain of the examples changes, right? Instead of seeing one line for an order, I'll now start seeing multiple lines, right? And that's okay. We just got to remember that we're using Beam as a technique to get the initial requirements and then we're modeling. We don't break order lines out into a separate piece of paper, right? Because in terms of a core business process, the customer orders a product. They just happen to order multiple products, yeah? So again, there's some little bit of flavour in there as you go through of trying not to model when you Beam, yeah? You're getting the data requirements out of the business SME. Oh, so that was the important thing that I really want to say. The number of times we will run a Beam workshop and we will have what we call a manager, you'll call it a vice president, or they are the wrong people to be in the room, right? Typically, we want the subject matter expert. We want the person who knows how the business process works and understands the data that's generated or used as part of that process. So the number of times I've run a Beam workshop where we have our managers in the room, and after the first half an hour, they stop the workshop to go out and get their key members to come in, is unbelievable, right? It's hard to explain to people what you need. We're still working on that, but it's the subject matter experts. It's those business users that understand the process and the data that you need in the room for this, not people who manage those teams. Yeah, they can sit and watch, they often learn, but they're not the ones that you need to elicit the requirements from. Okay, one last question. Yep.
You probably said it, but it wasn't quite clear to me. What is the output of Beam?
So what the output of Beam is the Beam template. So if I go way back, is this, right? We have some other artifacts. So Lawrence has a thing called a Beam matrix. It looks very much like a bus matrix and like an ELM matrix to a degree. So what we have is down the page we'll have the events, customer orders product. Across the top we'll have the W's but not the how many's, and we say that the customer order product consumes or creates order customer and product, right? So we get a matrix out of that. Lawrence also has a thing called a business canvas. He's taken the open source business canvas that you get for competitive analysis and applied that, and he has a new technique coming out this year around storyboarding. So he's over in New Zealand in November, so I'm looking forward to those new templates. So there's quite a bit of synergy between the ELM templates and the Beam templates. What ELM has that Beam doesn't have is the CDC definition, which is actually a really good template that we've been missing for a while. Is when I have that customer, actually, can I get some description or definition of a customer early? Yeah, not lots of detail, but enough that's important. So the CDC template, I'm definitely going to be bringing into the Agile process as a core template that I'll use from now on. Okay, thank you. Last thing is I pretty much blog when I finally get around to it, all my Agile stuff and try and share. So I've uploaded a presentation on there if you want a copy. And if you go to agilebi.guru, I kind of rant about or teach about the things that we've done as we go forward. Thank you.